Before I tell my tale, you need some context. When I was young, my family was heavily Christian, making me spend my Sundays at service and Wednesdays at youth group. I am not religious now, but those years instilled an awareness of the paranormal in me. As I grew up, I became more independent and rebellious, leading me to seek out forms of psychedelic spiritual enlightenment. It just so happened that I deemed that a priority over having a place to stay. As a young adult hooligan living in a small farm town in the middle of the Willamette Valley, there weren't a lot of opportunities for kids my age. You either partook in substances, worked in the wine industry, or got involved in the numerous cults around. It was about 10 p.m., and my friend and I were bumming smokes from patrons behind the local bar. There were about 5 people, my friend and me excluded. We were all a tad tipsy, sharing tales and shooting the crap, when a man walked out that I had never seen before. He was about 5.5 feet tall with odd proportions, donning a burly mustache that didn't fit his face. He wore a cowboy hat 2 sizes too big, a leather jacket over a plain white tank top, leather pants, and boots to finish off his outfit. He kind of just stood there, trying to be a part of the group, yet excluded through some metaphysical divide. After about 10 minutes of loitering, he started talking. He mentioned it was his birthday and referred to himself as the birthday boy. On and on, he would only talk about how it was his birthday, that he needed a cigarette because it was his birthday, that someone should buy him a drink for his birthday. I'm pretty sure it was his birthday. 30 minutes passed, and the patrons slowly started filtering out until it was just the birthday boy, my friend, and me. He asked us if we knew where any abandoned buildings were, and if we could take him to one. I was already unnerved, but at this point, my entire being was screaming at me to get away from him. It was like a switch had flipped, and I could feel some sort of evil intention radiating from him. I gave him some vague directions to a non-existent building and told him goodbye. He asked if I would take him there and celebrate his birthday with him, adding that he had gifts for us. I told him no because I needed to get to a friend's house to sleep. He then told me, and I quote, "I'll see you again, Noah," and gave a huge, inhuman grin. He proceeded to sprint backward for about 30 feet. Yes, backward, spin around, and run in the direction I had given him. I looked at my friend, and we both started running in the opposite direction, cutting through side streets and jumping a couple of fences. We eventually made it to my friend's house and got inside. About 20 minutes passed as we chilled and smoked, and then I heard someone singing, "Happy Birthday to You." I peeked out the window, and it was the fucking birthday boy. I don't know how he found us, but he paced up and down the street for an hour or two until he finally gave up and sprinted away. I never saw the birthday boy again, but I'll never forget his parting sound. The sound of cowboy boots furiously smacking the pavement. I don't know what the heck he was, but he was not human. To the birthday boy, let's not celebrate together. Ever. When I was younger, I went on a trip with my elementary school to a well-known camp. I didn't have many friends, so I ended up being placed in a cabin with other kids I didn't know well. It was nearly summertime in Georgia, hot and humid during the day, but surprisingly cold at night. We spent most of our time outdoors, doing typical camp activities like canoeing, roasting s'mores, and hiking. One evening, we were given the option to go on a night hike. Oddly enough, my cabin group was the only one interested, so we set off with a couple of teachers. Halfway through the hike, we were told we were walking through a slave burial ground. All those flat stones we'd been stepping on, they weren't random. They were headstones. We were just kids, and hearing this terrified us. I had always been fascinated by scary stories and the macabre, but this was too much for little me. Some of the girls became visibly uncomfortable and asked if we could turn back. Unfortunately, the teachers told us it would take twice as long to retrace our steps, so we had no choice but to keep moving forward. When we finally got back to our cabin, the mood was tense. Some of the girls were still spooked and asked if we could share bunks or at least leave the lights on. The teachers declined, citing camp rules, so we settled into our separate bunks. I was in a top bunk on the far wall. Once everyone was settled, the teachers came in, turned off the lights, and left us in the dark. About 10 minutes later, one of the girls screamed. I jolted awake and turned toward the sound. That's when I saw it. A tall, dark figure standing in the corner of the room. It was so tall it nearly touched the ceiling. Its eyes glowed a fiery red-orange, and it seemed to be wearing a hat. I stared at it, frozen in disbelief. Around me, the other girls began screaming and crying, clearly seeing the same thing I did. The teachers rushed back in as the first girl who saw it bolted out of the room in sheer panic. She hysterically described the figure to them, confirming what the rest of us had seen. The teachers quickly ushered us out of the room so they could investigate. They found nothing. No shadow, no strange objects, no signs of anyone or anything being there. The girl who had screamed first refused to go back into the room. She was so upset they had to call her mother to pick her up that night. When the rest of us eventually returned to the cabin and the lights were turned off again, the corner was empty. The figure was gone. In fact, the corner was unusually bright, almost as if nothing had ever been there. Even now, years later, I remember that night vividly. The other girls and I all agree on what we saw. This happened last year. My friends and I had the bright idea to get drunk and high on a Wednesday, so we got some weed and beers. Near our dorms, there's a railway that's a popular spot for smoking, drinking, and hanging out. It was really cold that night, so two of my friends had already started drinking to warm up. On the way there, I had a weird feeling, like we shouldn't be going. I shrugged it off, thinking it was just nerves since it was my first time trying weed. When we got there, we sat on some rocks, started drinking, and passed the joint around. After about 10 minutes, I heard a twig snap. I asked my friends if they heard it, but none of them did. One friend, sitting closest to me, said, "You probably imagined it. When you get high, you get paranoid." I accepted that explanation since I'd heard it was normal. A couple of minutes later, I heard shuffling in the bushes. Imagine a small trail opening into a circular area with large rocks, surrounded by bushes and trees. From above, it would look like a tree. This time, two of my other friends heard the noise too. We looked at each other nervously. One of them turned to the others, who were still talking, and said, "Did you hear that?" Our oldest friend rolled his eyes and said, "Really? You too now? Nothing's there." The moment he said that, we heard a whisper, "Are you sure?" The voice was raspy, like a woman who had been smoking for decades and had just woken up. It was so distinct and unnatural that it couldn't have been a prank. We all froze. Then we heard the same voice laugh, a sinister sound, nothing like someone laughing at a joke. The bushes rustled again, and that was all it took for us to run. I don't think any of us have ever run so fast. What should have been a 5-minute walk back to our dorms turned into a 1-minute sprint. I wish I could say that was the end, but it wasn't. Around 2 a.m., I had to head back to my apartment. The bus wasn't running that night, so I had to walk 25 minutes to get home. The moment I left my friend's dorm, I had a bad feeling. I told myself it was just paranoia, and that someone earlier had probably been playing a prank. 5 minutes into the walk, I started feeling like I was being followed. I looked behind me repeatedly, but there was nothing there. With about 5 minutes left to go, I heard shuffling in the bushes again. I froze, staring at the spot where the noise came from. I stood there for at least a minute before I heard the laugh, the same sinister laugh from earlier. I ran as fast as I could and made it to my apartment's main office in under a minute. There's always a cop stationed outside, and when he saw me, he looked concerned and asked what had happened. I didn't want to tell him, but I had no choice. I explained that I'd heard strange laughter in the bushes and that it scared the hell out of me. He nodded and said, "You too, huh?" I asked him what he meant, and he explained that 3 other people had reported the same thing, but no one knew what it was. He advised me to start taking the bus and to get home earlier. I agreed and went inside. Again, I wished that was the end, but it wasn't. When I got back to my apartment, I took a shower, got into bed, and tried to sleep. I fell asleep quickly, but woke up around 4:36 a.m. despite being exhausted. That struck me as odd. I'd only been asleep for about 45 minutes. Then, I heard the laugh again. I sat up and looked around. Straight ahead, I saw a shadow. It didn't look human, but it didn't look like an animal either. It was on all fours. Then it spoke, in that same raspy voice. "I know you're in there, Connie. I know you're up." It laughed again. I stayed frozen in my bed, trying not to cry from fear. I didn't sleep in my apartment after that. I practically moved into my friend's dorm for the rest of the semester. Thankfully, finals week was just a week away, and I'd already been accepted to another school. I don't tell this story often because people either think I'm joking or blame it on me not being sober. But I know what I heard that night, and I wasn't imagining it.